real transcendence is taking the mind from that surface, stressed, tense, anxious, gotta mind, and letting it just settle inward. Just access these deeper and actually more expanded levels of consciousness of your mind, calming down that deep peace.
So, hello Bob, how are you doing?
Hello, Andreas, it's nice to be with you.
Very nice indeed. So, for those who don't know Bob Roth, first of all, shame on you. But Bob is the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation and director of the Center for Leadership Performance. He's the author of the 2018 New York Times bestseller book, Strength in Stillness, The Power of Transcendental Meditation. Bob Roth is one of the most experienced and charismatic meditation teachers in the world, with I think 45.
Charismatic. Yeah. Charismatic.
Yeah. 45 years of experience
50.
now? 50. Wow, my God. Bringing transcendental meditation to more than 1 million students in underserved schools in 35 countries, to military veterans and their families who suffer from post-traumatic stress, and to women and children who are survivors of domestic violence. Bob is also the host of the Sirius XM radio show Success Without Stress, and speaks frequently about science of meditation to industry leaders at such gatherings as Google Zeitgeist, Aspen Ideas Festival, Wisdom 2.0, and Summit. So it is my absolute pleasure to discuss today with Bob stuff about meditation, the David Lynch Foundation, the mind, and of course, one of his favorite topics, I think, the science of meditation. So welcome, Bob.
And it's my absolute pleasure to be on the show with you.
Thank you very much.
Enormous respect for you and your work. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you, Bob. So I think you're very unconventional in many ways. When I think about a meditation teacher, the only thing that does not come to my mind is someone like you. So first of all,
flattery.
All flattery. Yes. I think of someone with a long beard, the classic stereotypical yoga teacher, if you want it. So my first question would be, what's the story before becoming a meditation teacher? How was when you were full of dreams and hopes during your childhood and teenage year? How was it?
Well, I grew up in a very politically minded family, a very socially active family in San Francisco Bay Area in the 1950s and 1960s. And I worked for Senator Bobby Kennedy in California when he was running to be the Democratic nominee for president back in 1968. And I saw him speak in San Francisco. This is for those of you who are young and don't know these times. In 1968, June 1st, he spoke in San Francisco. And I looked around the room and there were 2,000 people. And it wasn't that I was a Republican or a Democrat. It was, I want to change the world. I had that 60s idealism. I want to change the world. I wasn't really a hippie. I wasn't a druggie. I just thought, let's change some laws. Let's change the world. And was very inspired by him. And then 4 days later, he was assassinated in Los Angeles. Very devastating to me. I attended the University of California at Berkeley in October 1968 during chaos. And I went there, again, I just wanted to make a better world. I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be a US senator. So I was just this guy who that was my thing, idealism. And it was a stressful time. And I was looking for some way to deal with my stress. I didn't want to join a sect. I didn't want to become a political extremist. I'm a skeptic. My dad is a medical doctor. I love science. I like big ideas, but I'm not into woo-woo. And a friend of mine was doing something called TM, or Transcendental Meditation. Meditation wasn't a word in my vocabulary, but there was something about this guy. He was down to earth. He was just an admirable person. And he said I should give it a try. And I said, all right, I'll try it. If I don't like it, I'll walk out of the room in 30 seconds. Because there wasn't any research really at the time on TM. And I learned it, and Andreas, it was so relaxing. It was so easy. It was so, gosh, I felt so good, so fast. And here I'm this know-it-all 18-year-old kid. And afterwards I thought, wow. At that time I was interested in, I lost my fascination with politics because it was just too disruptive. And I thought, well, I'll get into education. And I thought, well, maybe I could teach this tool to inner city school kids. And that was June 28th, 1969.
1969.
Now I run a foundation that's brought it to 1 million inner city school kids. And I'm just me, so I haven't changed. Just because I got into teaching meditation, the nice thing about transcendental meditation is there's no agenda, there's no philosophy, there's no shtick, there's not the long hair and I got nothing against legitimate gurus, which means teacher. But for young Westerners to sort of adopt the attire. So yeah, I'm just me, and now looking to change the world on a foundational level by getting research on transcendental meditation done so that it can be incorporated into our healthcare system.
Yeah, that's great. So speaking of
long answer.
I like long answers, actually. So speaking of true gurus and true teachers, true masters, did you study with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was during the period where the Beatles actually got very popular about so many things, right?
I heard about it because of the Beatles. The Beatles were with Maharishi in February 1968. And so there was a lot of publicity about it. I learned to meditate in 1969. I first met him in August of 1970. I was living in Northern California, and there was a big summer 1-month accredited course that was led by Maharishi at Humboldt State College in Northern California that had Nobel laureates in physics and chemistry and artists and religious leaders. And they were all talking about, with Maharishi presiding, sort of all talking about the deeper levels of truth. What does physics tell us about the underlying essence of life? What does religion tell us? What does art tell us? And it was an amazing experience to see him so versatile with all these different disciplines. So that was in 1970. Then I became a teacher with about 2,000 people of TM in 1972. And then for the next 40 years, I spent time with him in India or in Europe or in the United States, but it was always in the context of academics and science.
Great.
He was a physicist by training. His background was physics. He was a scientist of consciousness. He wasn't a philosopher of consciousness. He was a scientist of the brain and of consciousness.
What strikes me most about Maharishi is that he was like one of these very, very rare human beings that can mix in a very nice way ancient wisdom with very, very modern science. And at that time, ideas were floating in the air, right? There was this idea of quantum mechanics and physics. We didn't know too much about the brain science of meditation. But even though with those very, like, I would say, preliminary ideas about things, he could create so much knowledge out of it. So that's a remarkable thing that I haven't seen in any other kind of traditions, that this kind of this very nice mixture of different disciplines, including science and ancient traditions, right?
And it was always with him and the people who were around him was this universal, this timeless quest for underlying reality of life. All right, scratch the surface. So now you've got the atomic level, and then the molecular level, and you've got the atomic level. You got what's underneath, and what can we learn from physics, and what can we learn from chemistry, and what can we learn from biology, and what do the ancient Talmudic scholars talk about, and what do the ancient Vedic scholars talk about, and what do the ancient Buddhist scholars talk about, and what was the worldview of Albert Einstein, and what was the worldview of Isaac Newton. And always this quest, open-minded, non-judgmental, no agenda, and a real quest and thirst for knowledge, because the deeper one goes, one gets closer to truth, the more impact that one can have. And after all, so many good things happen in life when we align ourselves with the deeper powers or energies or forces in nature. So fascinating person to be around, and timeless. I was around sometimes in some meetings and thinking, well, this could be during the time of Socrates. This could be during the time of Lao Tzu. This could be the time, whenever. When you strip away religion and you strip away the dogma that can attach itself to fundamental truths of life and just look at the fundamental truths. And that's what Maharishi's he pronounced his name Maharshi. It's in the West we call it Maharishi, but Maharshi's quest was
Yeah.
deeper knowledge and then applications.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something that we're gonna discuss. That is something that we're gonna discuss in a few minutes, the application. So speaking of timeless people, how do you meet David Lynch? Because I think that's I think that's I'm gonna tell you the story of how did I get into all of this in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to know how do you meet David, and how did you convince him? If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you convinced him of starting a foundation with his name on it, right?
Well, it's very interesting because I always used to wonder when I became a teacher of Transcendental Meditation in 1972, I was teaching at General Motors and I was teaching the general public. And then in the 80s, I was teaching at Apple Computer. But I always really wanted to bring this to at-risk, under-resourced populations. The children who suffered from adverse childhood experiences due to poverty, that puts them on a trajectory of prison or drugs or intimate partner violence. Their life was sort of predetermined almost from the age of 6 or 7 or 8 because of how much trauma they experienced at an early age. And my dad was a World War II veteran, and I saw the suffering that veterans had. So I always wanted to do that. And I always wondered, why isn't there some foundation that would just give the money so that we could employ TM teachers to go into the schools, to go into the VA hospitals, and teach people to meditate for free.
Yeah.
And then someone said, Bob, you're just complaining all the time that there's no foundation. Just start one yourself. And so I had a thought, we should just start a foundation. I didn't know what it meant. And then I knew of David because of his films, and someone told me that he was a meditator. And our paths had crossed at a couple of press conferences in Los Angeles. And then in 2004, we did some speaking together with some physicists and brain researchers about TM. He was sort of stepping out a little bit. He hates public speaking, but he loved Maharshi and wanted to make a better world. And then I remember saying to him, this is a very funny story. I said, we should start a foundation. And he said, I called him when he was editing, I think, Inland Empire or one of these things.
So he was out there. Yeah.
So, he wasn't really paying attention. So I called him up, and he's a very private person. I said, David, I'd really like to start a foundation and raise money to bring TM to at-risk populations. And he sort of went, like fine. And because he was on something else. And then I said, and I'd really like to call it, maybe if with you're okay, we could call it the David Lynch Foundation. Again, he said, And then I said, and I'd like to send out a press release and sort of say we're going to do this. Is that okay with you? He said, And so if I write the press release, because I knew how to do that, do you want to read it? He said, I think he just didn't think any was going to happen.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Andres, I wrote a really good press release. It didn't take much to say that David Lynch was going to start a foundation to bring meditation to inner city school kids. And 2 days later, we sent it out. 2 days later, it was on the front page of like 1,000 newspapers all over the world. And he called me up and he said, in the US, a nonprofit is a 501c3. And he said, what's a 501c3? And I said, I don't really know. But we started it, and that was almost 18 years ago. And now 1 million kids, and we're working in 50 hospitals. We have something called Heal the Healers. We can talk about that later. But we're bringing it to frontline people who are dealing with the trauma and stress of life.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story, actually. So I'm a scientist, so I like definitions sometimes. I'm actually a scientist that study consciousness, so it's even worse. So Bob, in 3 minutes, and then we can dig a bit deeper into it. What is transcendental meditation?
Use the analogy of an ocean, choppy waves on the surface, silent at its depth. The mind is turbulent on the surface. Our gotta mind, some people call it the monkey mind. I like to call it the gotta. I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I gotta call him all the gottas. And it's a natural human desire to say, I'd like some inner calm, some inner clarity, some inner peace, some inner ease. And in TM, we hypothesize like an ocean has turbulence on the surface and quiet at its depth. We hypothesize, there's no belief involved, that deep within every human being right now, every one of us has a level where the mind is already calm and settled and peaceful and alert. We've lost access to it. And transcendental meditation is a simple, natural, effortless technique practiced for 20 minutes twice a day, sitting comfortably in a chair through the use, and you silently use a sound, which is called a mantra that has no meaning. And you're taught how to use that mantra from a teacher and how to access that calm that lies within effortlessly. When that happens, when your mind accesses that inner calm, there's a transformation, a constellation of changes that take place in the way your brain functions, your cardiovascular system functions, your respiratory system functions, your digestive system functions, the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, cortisol levels, oxytocin levels, serotonin levels all change in the direction of calm and ease. And after that 20-minute period, we have more energy, more clarity, more focus, and less stress and anxiety. And it's simple to learn, and it's enjoyable to practice. That was under 3 minutes.
That was great. Yeah,
that was miraculous.
You're getting better and better at this. You look like the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation. So
you're just a tough taskmaster there. 3 minutes. It's got to be 3 minutes.
Yeah. So let's dig a bit deeper into the science of TM. So you really like to summarize, and you have done it before, all the physiological effects. We're gonna neglect the brain for now. So in terms of the physiology of the body, what would you say are the 3 or 4 more striking scientific results that you have seen in the last 40 years regarding the physiology?
Oh, I think that it mainly to this point is heart health. The National Institutes of Health have given $26 million to study the effects of transcendental meditation on reducing high blood pressure, hypertension, and risk of stroke, heart attack, and a reduction in cholesterol levels. So that's one. It's very significant. There's been 12 phase 2 clinical trials, and we're now working to raise the funds to do a phase 3 clinical trial in 10 different hospitals, research centers, that will leverage those results to make TM reimbursable by Medicare and insurance companies. The second area of research that there's considerable data now on is post-traumatic stress. Again, that has been funded by the Department of Defense, and that shows significant reductions. There was a phase 2 trial that was funded, $2.5 million study funded by the Department of Defense several years ago and published in the Lancet Psychiatry, that compared transcendental meditation to what they call prolonged exposure. Prolonged exposure is a, if you know what that is, that's a trauma-based treatment program. Mm-hmm. So you sort of get numb, you relive your experience. And that was, transcendental meditation was shown to be as good as prolonged exposure, which is the gold standard, and in many instances even better, more effective at reducing symptoms of PTSD and anxiety and impulsivity. And now a phase 3 trial is beginning at 9 VA hospitals in about a month. That's going to look at PTSD, suicidality. 21 veterans take their lives every day in America. Wow. It's a travesty beyond belief. And substance use disorder. Mm-hmm. So that's the second. First is cardiovascular disease. Second is PTSD. And the third is the area just coming up. The Department of Defense has given Duke University $7.4 million to do a study on TM and healthcare, frontline healthcare workers. And that's looking at burnout, anxiety, depression, and resilience. And that study has been designed also to get reimbursement from insurance companies. So all 3 of these research studies, this is the most significant results, all being done with the intention of having it covered by insurance companies so that anyone with these pathologies, these problems, can learn to meditate for free. I'm not talking about brain research, but we're
gonna get there.
Yeah.
So this podcast is called Talking Brains. So if we don't talk about the brain, it would be like a disaster. So okay, I'm the neuroscientist. I know that, but
now you're going to talk. Now I'm going to interview you because I know you're doing some neuroscience research on TM. Can we pause for a moment?
Of course.
Okay, can I ask you some questions?
Yes, you can. We can keep recording.
Yeah, no, this is keep recording. This is part of it. Okay, tell me what is most intriguing interesting, potentially significant about the changes that take place in the brain when a person does transcendental meditation as a neuroscientist?
Yeah. So to me, let me tell you a little story. So I decided to become a neuroscientist because of David Lynch.
Really?
Yes. Because of David Lynch, because of Francisco Varela, who was a genius neuroscientist. But I remember vividly that I was 13 or 14 years old. I watched Mulholland Drive, and I also watched Lost Highway. And
At 13?
yeah, at 13, that was a bit, my parents didn't know. But the thing is, there was a specific scene where Mr. M in Lost Highway shows up. And Mr. M apparently is a hallucination of the main character. And then I asked myself, how is it possible that a piece of meat inside my skull is responsible for generating images or generating creativity or generating an hallucination, something that is not there? And that was the first time that I ever asked that question to myself. And then I said, how can I study this? So then I found out that the way that you can do that is by doing neuroscience. So I decided to study biology back at home. I'm from Chile. And then I said, I really want to do a PhD on this, and I want to go to Cambridge University. So I applied, and magic happened. I got the place here. I did my PhD. And then during the beginning of the pandemic, so in 2020, after finishing the PhD and doing a lot of other things, I just said, well, what now? I really want to know what this TM is, because I stopped thinking about it when I was 13, and then I realized that maybe this is the right time to do so. So I contacted people. I actually saw a very nice interview of Susie Pearl. You know Susie Pearl, the writer.
Like her a lot.
She's great. She's a very good friend.
Oh,
So
give her my best.
I will. So she was interviewing David, and I said, I have to contact her. I want to know. So I contacted her. We became very good friends, and she put me in contact with Deirdre Parsons, the CEO of the DLF here in the UK. And this is how everything started. It was like, I really want to learn this technique because all the things that I've heard are just fantastic. So when I learned, and I'm not making this up, the first time I practiced properly, I sat on my bed and I said, okay, I'm going to repeat this thing that people are telling me to do, and I'm going to do it, and let's see what happens. And there was a moment where I was practicing that I literally felt that I was in an elevator and someone cut the cable. And after the effect of like falling, I had this extremely huge sense of peace. Big, massive, like better than any other pleasant moment that I have had so far, as far as I remember. It's a very sustained effect. And then I just said, okay, I need to know what this is. What the hell is this? This is marvelous. But probably it's not going to happen again. My skeptic mind, it's not going to happen again. It's placebo. I'm being basically, I've been expecting this to happen. So if I do it again, it will never happen again. Well, since the 28th of March of 2020, I've been practicing twice a day, every day, and it happens every single time. Right? So that is something that's, okay, how can I call this? I don't know, but I want to know more.
I have to just interrupt by saying, people who are listening, this doesn't happen to everybody. So just, and they're wonderful meditators. Andres has some extraordinary experiences, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So I had that. And I think that was enough for me to say, okay, I want to know more. So I started reading about Fred Travis' research. I read the whole bunch of research that is available.
Dr. Fred Travis is the head of the brain and science, and the brain center at Maharishi International University, and he's published about 70 papers
on TM. Yeah. And then to me, the main finding was, okay, when you practice TM, there is an increase in what we call alpha waves in the front of the head, in particular alpha 1, so 9 to 10 cycles per second. That is unique in the sense that it's different than other types of meditation like focus attention, is different than other types of meditation like open monitoring. And at that time, I was finishing my PhD and I was studying phase synchronization across the brain. So then I say, okay, this is amazing. What's going on? So to answer your question, two main two main interests that I have so far. One is this alpha wave, is this alpha coherence actually a reflection of how the brain transfers information between different areas? Is it actually a carrier of information, or is it just a correlate of the subjective experience of restful alertness? In other words, is it a mechanism or is it just an epiphenomenon? So one way of answering that is going into this, what we call science of complexity, which is instead of analyzing how different brain waves are synchronized or jumping together, you can actually ask the question, is this brain wave informative enough for the brain? Does it carry any meaningful information? And what we know from consciousness science of the last 5 years is that the more complexity your brain has, so basically the more complicated the information patterns the brain has, the more awake you are. So the more thoughts you have in mind, the more wakefulness you have. And there is this proportionality effect that the more alertness, the more thoughts you have, and the higher the complexity. But the interesting thing about TM to me is that you have this very beautiful effect where when you are in this deep state of restful alertness, all the contents of consciousness, the stuff in the head, the gotta thing that you were mentioning, goes almost to zero, while the axis of alertness is completely full. So it's a paradoxical effect because you're fully there, but you're there about nothing.
So say that again. Say that again. Say that again. So content is reduced.
Content is reduced. Alertness is increased. That's what I think.
Because ordinarily, it's when you increase content, you're increasing alertness.
Exactly. That's our normal. Let's think about when you're in a comatose state, you're basically, your cycles, your wake sleep cycles are reduced and your content is reduced. Let's say that you're asleep, you have a bit of you're not alert, but your levels of content the contents can be somehow active if you're dreaming. But if you're fully awake, you have full alertness and full content. So there is a proportionality effect there.
Yeah.
But with TM, you have this very paradoxical thing that contents are almost zero and alertness is almost full.
What is mindfulness? What is it with mindfulness?
So I guess with mindfulness, if we speak about open monitoring, I would say you still have the contents.
Yeah, you still have content.
You still have the alertness, but you dispassionately observe the contents, right? So you kind of remove the emotional bit of it. So I would say you're still in the axis of normality, if you want. Yeah.
Can I take a moment to just sort of explain the differences between?
Please go ahead. So.
Okay, and then
this should be the other way around, but
no. This is a conversation. This is better.
Great.
Better. So if you use the analogy of the ocean, where you have choppy waves on the surface and quiet at its depth, and the mind there's three types of meditation according to brain science. One, you use the term focused attention. Focused attention is a concentration form of meditation where you try to concentrate on, you control what they call the monkey mind. And so you try to stop the mind from wandering, and you do that by focusing on a point in your body or your breath or some idea. And the analogy is, if you want to have a calm ocean, what disrupts a calm ocean? Waves. So stop the waves, you have a calm ocean. If you want to have a calm mind, thoughts are disruptor of a calm mind. So minimize or stop thoughts, and then you have a calm mind. And the brainwave correlate to that is gamma brainwaves, which can be anywhere from 20 to 50 or 25. It varies, but it's very intense. The second approach is called open monitoring. And open monitoring doesn't say that thoughts are necessarily the disruptor of calm, but the content of thoughts can be the disruptor of calm. So if you have a thought about a guy named Joe and you don't know anybody named Joe, no disruption. But if you have a thought about a guy named Joe and 5 years ago, Joe done you wrong, and now you think about that, now you're upset. So open monitoring teaches us to be in the present. Don't be 5 years ago. Be a dispassionate observer, as you just said, of that thought about Joe. So don't be in the past or the future, be in the present. And that is like dispassionately observing the waves rise and fall. And that brainwave, there are many different correlates, but theta brainwave, 4 to 8 cycles per second. Those two approaches to meditation are called cognitive approaches, pertaining to your thoughts, your moods, your feelings, your actions, the waves. The third approach is called automatic self-transcending, and that is transcendental meditation. And that accepts the fact that there's choppy waves on the surface, but also recognizes that there's a vertical dimension to our mind, that we feel things deeply, we know things deeply, we have an intuition that tells us somebody says, Andres, I want you to do this research study. And it makes perfectly good sense up here, but then you have a few minutes by yourself to think quietly. And now your intuition, you go, I don't think so, Jack. And that's a level of thinking, it's just abstract. And then, as you said, when we access that during TM, those deep quiet levels, then you have the alpha brain waves, which are 9 to 10. So those are the three different approaches. And TM is not a cognitive approach. TM is a experience of that deep, quiet, transcendent level. Back to you now, Doctor.
So first question is, how is this complexity metric related to TM? So the obvious prediction would be that the lower the alertness, the lower the content, the lower the brain complexity. But here you have this paradox where you have almost zero content, zero thought, and almost full alertness. So what's going to happen with the metric? What's going to happen with the complexity of the brain? Is it going to look like sleep? Is it going to look like a comatose patient? How is it going to look like? The subjective experience is clearly fully alert, fully awake, but apparently you don't have enough content in the mind. So that's a question that to me is completely open. I think that what we're going to find is a decrease in this complexity metric, which is basically a reflection of an extremely quiet mind. But I have no idea what's going to be the brain mechanism of the alertness, right?
How will you be studying this?
So basically what we're going to do is that, and this is thanks to Deirdre Parsons here, we're going to bring 40 to 50 meditators that have at least 5 years of practice, that they have a regular practice, and we're going to make them to meditate twice during the day. We're going to record their brain activity during meditation, a baseline before and a baseline after, and we're going to run several questionnaires to correlate the subjective experience of different dimensions of the meditation with the brain activity. We can do that now with very sophisticated tools. We can actually track if they draw, let's say, if you ask them, how attentive were you during the practice? And then they need to draw with a pencil on a piece of sheet how attentive they were. Then we can actually correlate their subjective experience, reported as this line, with the brain activity during those 20 minutes of meditation. And the way how we're going to analyze the data is by using a metric of brain activity that is called brain complexity. And the idea is very simple. If you have a very repetitive signal without that many complications, just very repetitive, and you try to compress it like a zip file, like the kind of compression that you use for compressing your photos, if the signal is very repetitive in the brain, the compression is going to be really, really high. So we say that the complexity is very low because you can compress it really nicely. But if your brain signal is all chaotic and weird, it's going to be really hard to compress. So the complexity is going to be higher. So the question is, during that state, when your thoughts goes almost to zero and your alertness goes almost to 1,000, what happens with the brain complexity? Does it become less or more complex? My prediction is going to be the complexity is going to drop, but that's going to be a very interesting result because we only see complexity dropping when alertness and content goes down. So it's going to be...
this is fascinating. And why is this a significant study? Why would this outcome be important? What are the consequences of this?
I think it would be the first demonstration that you can dissociate very nicely these two axes of consciousness. The axis of alertness with the axis of content in a non-pathological situation. In a completely normal state, you can reach a separate kind of state where these two axes are fully dissociated. And I think that would be the first time that someone shows something like this. And I know what Bob is thinking. Bob is thinking, okay, how can we use this in some way?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
How are we going to help those?
Yes.
How are we going to help those frontline healthcare workers, or what is the significance of this for a student, or for learning?
For learning. Okay, so I have a second study for you that we're going to run, and you're going to probably love this even more. And it's about creativity. A colleague of mine in Le Sorbonne in Paris, she published a study at the end of last year in Science Advances, showing that with a single minute of sleep onset, not sleep onset, basically drowsiness, a single minute of sleep onset is enough to boost creativity in an insight kind of task by 3 times.
Wow.
I contact her, Celia, she's great. And I said, Celia, at the end of your paper, you said that you were looking for some kind of method that bring people directly to that state that you're describing, like the sweet spot.
They call it a gap. Or
exactly. The sweet spot there. And you have no idea what method that might be. I'm going to tell you what method that might be. It's called TM.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure that if we run that study, but instead of having the before and after the task is very simple. They have to solve a numerical task on a screen. The task is very complicated unless they get the trick, they get the insight. And then what she did was basically to make them to have an app, trying to test Edison's method of holding an object, getting into an app, and when you're dozing off, you drop the object and you wake yourself up. And during those moments that you wake yourself up is that when the insight comes. And she proved that that's exactly what happened. They wake themselves up and they got it. They just get what was the rule and they solve the task immediately. Very fast.
Now, I have a question for you. Unfortunately, I don't remember the publication of the study, but it can be Googled. I read this article where they talk about the creative process involving the attention control center, which is where in the front of the brain where you're sort of focusing and working hard. And so the researchers, they stumbled upon this. The researchers said, okay, well, what is the brain doing? What does the brain default to when it's not focusing hard? And they came up with an innovative name, the default mode network. And the default mode network for a long time was disregarded. Oh, that's the wandering mind. That's a daydreaming mind. There's nothing significant about it. And I know mindfulness is happy when you can reduce the activity of the default mode network. But now they have new names for the default mode network. They call it the imagination network, and they also call it the genius lounge.
The genius lounge, okay.
It's a term they use. I love it. And that is that state, that what you're talking about, where the brain is not focused, it's not working, it's just in that sort of innocent, you're taking a hot shower and a good idea comes, you go for a walk, the good idea comes, you transcend in meditation, you experience that silence. And David Lynch talks about this, in this non-linear good idea comes, and that the creative process is a balance between innovation and focus, concentration. And that in this study, they've talked to 200, usually it's you have one or the other, and then the salience network turns one on and turns one off. And in this study, they had 200 people who they considered to be among the most creative people in the world, and they found that their brain was wired different, Andres, where you were able to have both at the same time. You were able to focus and innovate. And so a lot of the research on TM and creativity, I'd be fascinating to look at that, because I know TM does activate the default mode network, and it also is very good for the focus. So perhaps it's rewiring the brain to maintain that high levels of, keep the genius lounge going while you're focused. Your comments on that, your thoughts on that?
I love this, Bob, because we're basically, I don't have the chance to discuss a scientific protocol with one of the most renowned teachers of TM in the planet. So this is great. My comment would be, yes, I think the sweet spot between the activation of the DMN, of the default mode network, and deactivation of the attentional network, that transition is the sweet spot that we want to try to keep people fixed there. And I think what a good not a nap, but the transition between wakefulness and sleep, which is basically when you're dozing off, the drowsiness that you experience for a minute or two, the hypnagogic state, as they call it, the moment that you start dozing off and images start appearing in your mind, or sounds, or you start having memories, start having like free associations between different things. That moment is the moment where if you wake someone up after leaving a task for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or an hour, this is where the insights just emerge out of, I don't know where, but they just emerge. So what would you think about TM? Because I think TM is a way of just directing people's mind towards that zone and maintaining the people in that zone for at least 20 minutes. So my prediction would be that you're going to see an effect equivalent of even bigger than the one that you can get with this tiny 1 minute nap.
Yes, actually, and this is where Maharishi's insights came in, because he really was considered the preeminent scientist of consciousness from this ancient Vedic or ancient science of consciousness. And he had many, with Dr. Fred Travis and many top brain researchers. And he talked about in the ancient text, meditation texts talk about, well, we know we have waking, dreaming, and sleeping states of consciousness, 3 main states, but these ancient texts talk about a 4th state of consciousness, Turiya Tit, they call it, or they call it the 4th, which is that transcendental state of consciousness, that quiet, in that ocean analogy, that deep, silent, beneath intuition, where the mind is completely settled and unbounded and the source of our creativity. And that, he said, you experience for 20 minutes when you meditate. But however, he said, that experience is also located in the gaps between waking and falling asleep, between falling asleep and then going into the REM state, and then from REM back into non-REM state, and then waking up again, that you dip into that for a moment. And so, yes, you may find that for a moment that you're falling asleep, that you're not in sleep state yet, or people have had that experience. You're in the morning, you wake up, but you're not awake and you're not asleep. You're in this sort of twilight. Well, you experience that for 20 minutes in its pure form in transcendental meditation. And so Maharishi predicted that, yes, you're going to have access for 20 minutes rather than just a few seconds. So it's a wonderful insight, and it's absolutely the case.
So we're gonna try it. We're gonna test it.
I think that is fantastic. That is fantastic.
And I think you would love it, because it would basically, if it works, and I think it will be, it will show that a single session of TM, no matter what your level is, it's enough to boost your creative insight.
Yes. And Maharishi one time was asked, he said, well, a meditator came to him once and said, Maharishi, sometimes my meditations seem deep, but many times they just to be on the surface. Are the deeper meditations better? And he said, no, they're both good. And the person said, how's that possible? And Maharishi said, because even in a shallow dive, we get wet. So that's another wonderful thing about TM, is there's no judgment, there's no pressure, there's no competition. It's just an effortless process of settling down and accessing that inner peace and quiet, and then all the changes that take place in the brain.
Yeah, that's great. So these are the 2 things that we're going to run during this year.
Fantastic.
And I'm super excited about that.
So, and the study is being done at Cambridge?
This study will be performed here at the Consciousness and Cognition Lab at the Department of Psychology of University of Cambridge, with my colleagues and some PhD students that we have now. So it's going to be great.
That's fantastic. Really fantastic. Okay, other questions?
Other questions. So next question is, can you please explain what are the current projects of the DLF? Because I'm really interested in trying to, to explain people what the David Lynch Foundation is currently doing. Why is it so important to support the David Lynch Foundation if you like meditation or if you want a better world? And basically, what are the main projects that you have running at the moment?
So the foundation was started almost 18 years ago with the intention of bringing transcendental meditation for free to at-risk kids in the United States. Those were living at or below the poverty level, 16 million kids. So we started bringing TM to school kids, and then school kids were doing it in the US and around the world. And then some of the kids' parents were veterans. So then they said, well, why can't we learn? So then we started offering it to veterans. And then it expanded to, now we're really focused on we call it Heal the Healers Now. We're bringing TM to frontline healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, ambulance, morgue drivers, everybody in hospitals, because they're suffering from the same levels of PTSD, and they're there forever. It's not like they're just going for combat and then they come back. So our focus is really on kids who are young people who are the victims, you can say, of this high levels of trauma and toxic stress in society, veterans who are also, you could say, the victims of that outcome, war and violence. But now we're also working with people who are literally serving the front lines: police, firefighters, ambulance drivers, so-called first responders, and doctors and nurses. So with the idea, Andres, of doing these large-scale phase 3 clinical trials that will same type of trials that are being done by pharmaceutical companies to get reimbursement by their insurance companies or by the by the National Health Service. That's our focus. Independent research done not by meditating, by even MIU, Maharishi International University, but independent researchers, and that's our focus. And a person came up to me about 2 years ago, and they said, the David Lynch Foundation was started to bring TM to at-risk populations in the US. Well, now there's 330 million people in America who are at risk. How are you going to bring it to 330 million people? Yeah. You never raise that amount of money, because we would raise it as a nonprofit to give it for free. And I, said through the healthcare system. Yeah. And to get into the healthcare system, it's obvious when it comes to physical health that we understand the pathology of high blood pressure. We understand the pathology of infection. You need an antibiotic, or you need a beta blocker, but we don't understand the pathology of anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder and what's involved in resilience, these mental health issues. And it's clear that the model in medicine of we reimburse for pharmacological interventions or surgical interventions or talk therapies, that's not enough. It's not scalable. So they're obviously looking for new ways to address that, and transcendental meditation is going to fit right in, because it's universal. Anyone can do it. It's no special skill set, no educational, proficiency. Anyone from the age of 10 years and up can do it, and there's even something for 5-year-old kids and up. And so this is the future. The David Lynch Foundation is basically a research organization funding studies, just as you have the Breast Cancer Research Foundation or the Kidney Foundation raise money to do research.
Yeah, that's great. So can we speak a bit more in detail about the practice? Because I think people have a lot of doubts sometimes. We are in the era of, how do I call it, the mindfulness era, right? So basically, meditation can be found everywhere, from schools to prisons to sport teams. There is an explosion of that. Meditation became mainstream from a commercial point of view. Tons of apps, programs, all promising different things. For instance, because of the pandemic, one of the meditation apps is projected to be worth $2 billion by the end of 2022. There is mindful meats, like beef, mindful mints. There is even organic mindful mayo. So there is an explosion of mindfulness. So for you, Bob, as a responsible teacher that you are you concerned that people might not have a positive experience via the current apps, for instance, where they might not have the proper guidance, they might not have a qualified teacher helping them or supporting them, or even so, they can even experience some kind of side effects that are not necessarily beneficial. So what's your take on this?
It's a plus and a minus. Mindfulness is definitely, and all these apps are definitely opening the doors, busting down the doors to meditation and mindfulness, and this idea of taking time out to deal with, on a mental level, anxiety or stress or those sorts of things. So that's a positive. We run into the negatives lots of times in the schools, where children are taught mindfulness early on and they don't like it much. I'm sure there are exceptions, but they don't like it much. So when their parents, who maybe do transcendental meditation, say, I'd like you to learn TM, they say, So I find that, and a lot of people saying, if they're taught the focused attention meditation that we just spoke about, I can't clear my mind of thoughts. I can't sit still. The longest I can sit with my eyes closed is 1 minute. I don't like to fail. I can't control my mind. So there is that, okay, I'm not having a good experience. I don't want to do this anymore. And I like to say that at this time, there's never been a greater need for meditation. There's never been greater access to some meditation or mindfulness approach, and there's never been a greater misunderstanding of what meditation actually is. And if you do one form of meditation and you don't like it, that doesn't mean it's across the board. There are many different types of meditation. So what it gives us the opportunity, though, is to explain, first of all, what does transcendental mean? People are always saying, well, how is transcendental meditation different from regular meditation?
Yes, or mantra meditation.
Or mantra meditation, which mantra meditation is actually the way mantra meditation is practiced as a focused attention. And I tell them, I say, well, let's define transcendental. If you look up the definition of transcend in the dictionary, it says to go beyond ordinary human limitations. To go beyond ordinary human limitations. And we generally, we look for transcendent moments all the time in our life. We go to a concert and we come back. How'd you like? Oh, it was an unbelievable concert. Why? There was something magical happened. There was a moment there where it was just, I just lost myself or something. Or we look for transcendent moments with a partner, with a significant other. You hold a newborn baby in your arms. There's just a moment where everything stands still. We love that. We love transcendent moments. We look for transcendent moments, though, every day. We say, we come home from work, honey, what do you want to do? Let's go out to dinner. I got to break my boundaries. We live life through boundaries. I got to break. I want to go to a different place for vacation. I want to get different food. I want to take a theater class, something different. The problem is, and I'm just defining transcendent. Do you mind this whole thing?
I love it. I had a question about it, so you're answering before even I asked it.
Good. So the problem with looking for transcendent moments to break boundaries on we'll call it a horizontal level. Instead of going from this restaurant, I go to that restaurant. Instead of going to that vacation spot, I go to that vacation spot. Instead of wearing my hair like this, I wear my hair like this. The extraordinary very soon becomes ordinary. And so we're constantly looking and looking and looking. Well, my relationship, she's got to change, or he's got to change, or this is stale, or I don't like my work. The problem is that's because you're looking for that transcendent moments from one to the other. Real transcendence is taking the mind from that surface, stressed, tense, anxious, gotta mind, and letting it just settle inward. Just access these deeper and actually more expanded levels of consciousness of your mind, calming down that deep peace. And then when we finish having that true transcendent experience in transcendental meditation, we bring that inner unboundedness back to our relationships. Now my significant other doesn't have to entertain me all the time, doesn't always have to, or my child or my job. I'm not looking for fulfillment, satisfaction from everything outside. I have that within me. And now I can enjoy my life more. So what transcendental meditation does is I tell people it's an effortless process of experiencing that, instead of bound, at unbounded ease in life. And you carry that with you in your daily life. And it's powerful. So to answer the question, people come to it. They've tried other things. And then they say, I hear good things about TM. I have friends who do it. They say it's effortless. They say it's enjoyable. And they come to it. And then they love it, like you did or like I did with that experience. And it's so effortless.
Yeah.
And it's all right, I'll stop talking. You can ask.
No, that's the effortless part. I think it's the key word there, because.
So let me explain why it's effortless.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Because other forms of meditation are not. You try to stop the mind from wandering. So in transcendental meditation, we don't say, in mindfulness, they'll often say, and I'm not putting down some people, mindfulness has good results, and I always say it's not either or. If you're doing mindfulness, you can practice that, and you can also, and 20 minutes later, practice TM. So you can do that. So I just say that it's the mind doesn't wander aimlessly. The mind is in search of something of greater happiness. You're sitting in a room listening to terrible music. In the other room, some beautiful music comes on. Your attention is drawn to that music. You have two books to read. One book is bad, can't read a word. The other book is great. Hours go by. It's not the nature of the mind to wander aimlessly. It's the nature of the mind to seek greater happiness. Inside, very nice, happy place.
Yeah.
Peaceful place. And all we're doing with TM is give the attention of the mind in inward direction, and effortlessly it's drawn inward.
Yes. So, in that respect, could you please, Bob, debunk the idea that the mantra is some sort of spiritual paracetamol that has some kind of intrinsic power in itself?
Yes. So the purpose of the mantra, the mind wants to think. To tell us to clear your mind of thoughts is very cruel. The mind thinks. It's always thinking. It shows that we're, alive. We have thoughts. So, and thoughts have two qualities to them. They have sound, specific sound. If you have the sound kitchen, so it has the sound kitchen, and then it has a meaning involved in it. And if I have the sound kitchen, specific sound and specific meaning, it engages my mind on the surface level, and now I'm thinking that sound with meaning. Transcendental meditation, it's a sound that, number one, has no meaning associated with it. Because now if it has a meaning, I'm up here on the surface. Now there's no meaning. It's like the difference between listening to a classical symphony or listening to an album that has Bob Dylan music or something like that with all these meaning. So it's much more peaceful that there's no meaning associated with it. And the sound itself is also, it's soothing, it's a positive, life-supporting. It comes from ancient times, but it's not what magically gives us the results. The way we use the mantra effortlessly, not mantra meditation where you repeat it 100 times, but that effortless transcendence of just letting it go, then what that does is that inner levels of the mind, consciousness, that's where all the changes take place. It's not that the mantra is magical. It's an effective vehicle, a proven vehicle to allow the mind to settle in. But all the benefits happen because that's who we are at those quieter levels of consciousness.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I think, why you need a teacher, right?
Yes, because the teacher works with you and says, here's the mantra for you, and here's how to use it properly. Well, I'm not sure I'm getting that right. Or is it supposed to be like this? And the teacher's right there to answer your question immediately. I like to say, you can't raise a child digitally. You can't teach a person to meditate for that turning within, that delicate process of here's your mantra and then turn within and settle down. That you want human to human. Take an hour, hour and a half. After that, you can do remote. But that one-to-one is crucial for the proper transcending.
So, Bob, I have a question for you again about, I'm not sure if you're aware of the fact that during the last 5-6 years, there are people concerned about side effects of meditation, because we always speak about the benefits and the benefits and the benefits for many, 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 many good reasons. But there is also some unspoken truth. I'm not going to say this is a terrible thing, but for some reason, when you meditate, if you have some kind of distress during the practice, I'm talking about meditation in general, some people don't want to talk about it because they think that they're defeating the purpose of feeling better or feeling good. So there is very nice research coming from Dr. Britton. She's from Brown's Clinical and Affective Neuroscience Lab. And she has focused on studying basically harmful side effects of mindfulness-based programs. And what she found was basically that there are several, I would say, not that nice effects, like hyperarousal effects and hypoarousal effects. The hyperarousal effects are basically anxiety, panic attacks, agitation, insomnia, traumatic memories reemerging, while the hypoarousal ones are varieties of dissociations, like feeling that my mind is empty, feeling outside of your body, loss of emotion, etc., etc. So my question is basically, have you ever seen any serious report on TM with such an adverse effect? That's first question. The second question is, In the case of the veterans that are being tested for traumatic stress, if you teach mindfulness to someone who is mindfulness, if you teach mindfulness to someone who suffer from a trauma, the moment that you start focusing on your breath, like your chest or your body, and the fact that traumas are usually related to some kind of body sensation, you immediately gonna trigger a panic attack, or it's highly likely that that happens. So how do you manage the potential side effects of teaching meditation, and in particular of TM?
Well, first of all of our teachers who work with trauma victims are specially trained to work with them. It's another thing. We don't consider this transcendental meditation is not a mass meditation. That's why we have this teacher to student relationship, because these aren't, and more this is happening, just people coming in off the streets, a single mom or a dad who's working at a CEO of a company has trauma, so every person is treated individually and cared for with a very careful follow-up, and our teachers are properly trained. And that was one of the reasons why the Veterans Administration and the Department of Defense provided so much funding for us to do these programs, and are working with us on this phase 3 trial, because they see that there has been no published research showing that transcendental meditation either as a cause or exacerbates trauma, or those trauma symptoms that you're talking about. That said, if a person does walk in off the street or something, and they didn't tell us initially their situation, then our teachers note, oh, well, let's cut back your meditation from 20 minutes to 5 minutes, or let's just sit quietly for a little bit. We build them up so that they're ready to be able to handle the meditation. But the most important thing is, unlike many forms of focused attention, mindfulness, where there's a specific goal in mind, oh, I want to clear my mind of thoughts, or and a judgment involved, was I successful or not? Transcendental meditation is 100% natural. There is no agenda, there's no goal, you don't have to clear your mind of thoughts. You actually get to do something. You're thinking a mantra rather than trying to force out thoughts. And people, for example, schizophrenics, they don't want to close their eyes for half a minute. But they enjoy transcendental meditation because there's something to do. You're thinking a mantra, but you're thinking it in the most delicate, tender, gentle, comfortable way that it actually engages the mind and doesn't disrupt the mind, or doesn't create frustration in the mind. So I would just have to say that the mechanics are different from those focused attention types of meditation, and the training of the teachers and our ability to work carefully with students. Some people have said, well, you're not going to be able to scale yourself unless you can go 100% digital. You're not going to be able to scale yourself. And I say the goal, the solution here is not watering down the meditation or changing the meditation and losing its effectiveness. The purpose, the intention here is train more teachers. Every guidance counselor in a high school can be trained as a TM teacher. Every person who's in a VA hospital or HR department could be trained as a TM teacher. Meditation shouldn't be seen as some mass thing, like we're going to do mass surgery. It's going to be something that is important, that we recognize its value, and we take the time out for proper training and proper experience. Yeah. So it's a different mechanism, and we have never had there's never been a published research showing that when you control for this and this and this, and you do 200 people, nothing has ever shown up like that.
Okay, that's great.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It does. Yes, and a friend of mine, for instance, suggested to include in the when teachers are actually getting their training, to have some sort of psychological training in order to identify moments where you can clearly see that a person is having, for instance, something that as obvious as a panic attack.
All of our teachers do that. When we work in the schools, the schools have a training for recognizing suicidality among children, psychosis, all of those things, recognizing that, so that we are ready we're not the experts, but we see the symptoms and we turn it over to the experts. So As we go, we're working with women and children who are victims of domestic violence. That's where we are mainly. So our teachers are very well qualified.
That's great. That's great. And one last question for Bob, because he needs to run to another meeting. This section is called Misconceptions about TM that drive Bob nuts. And I'm not even going to mention them. I'm going to give you the chance to rant for 4 minutes about the 3 or 4 misconceptions that you have heard more often that basically drives you nuts. It can go. It can span the spectrum from, I don't know, this is a religion, a cult, brainwashing, to, I don't know, why do I need to pay for this? It can be anything. You choose.
It used to be the whole thing about cult and brainwashing. That's not an issue anymore. Religion,
okay, good.
I mean, somebody's there, but as we started this conversation, the way I'm dressed, the way I look. Now, I teach mainly veterans and inner city school kids, but sometimes I have the opportunity, because of David Lynch, to teach well-known actors and
celebrities. Yes,
right. So I went over to teach Tom Hanks to meditate, who, by the way, is one of the finest human beings I know. And I was dressed. I had on blue jeans and a sport coat, and I was in New York. And he was going to come to my office, but I was right near his home. So I knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and he took this step back, and he said, "Oh my God!" And I said, "What?" He said, "I expected you to be wearing." To have on like white flowing this and have a man bun, And I said, "Tom, if your cardiologist was coming by to talk to you about something, you wouldn't think they were going to dress that way." And my thing is that meditation, properly understood, or transcendental meditation, it doesn't have this affectation. That's just nonsense. Yeah. It's just distraction.
Yeah.
We're normal human beings. It's a skill set that we teach. So that's one thing. Fortunately, that's changing. Second thing is I've tried all types of meditation. I can't do it. And so I'm not going to try transcendental meditation. And just that frustration that there's not just one kind of meditation. I just talked about that. And if you've tried a meditation and you haven't been satisfied, then you should keep looking, because there are different types, and find one that has an affinity for you. I think it's transcendental meditation. You have to look for yourself, but there is something out there, and you don't have to say, well, the rest of my life I'm going to be on anti-anxiety or depressive pills. I don't mind. Medication helps a lot of people, but that's not the end game result. I'm going to take medication for the rest of my life. And I think the last one is, and I understand it, I don't have time to meditate. And I say, there's 1,440 minutes in your day. You don't have a few minutes to set aside? If you don't have a few minutes, then you're going to have to reprioritize, because it's no longer a luxury. When we look at the high levels of anxiety, the high levels of depression, the high levels of dysfunction, particularly among our kids, suicide levels, children from 5 to 11, rates going into the hospitals because of threats of suicide. We have to start we have to reprioritize. And so if you got 1,440 minutes, set aside a few minutes twice a day for your own self-care, your own mental health and well-being. It will impact the rest of your life. You're going to sleep better. You're going to be more effective. You're going to waste less time. It'll be a game changer for you. So I think those 3 things.
That's great. That's great. And that's exactly why I'm probably the only person in Cambridge that salivates like a cat when he sees like a tuna can, but I salivate every time that I see an empty bench on the park, because I can sit and do it there. Yes. Okay, Bob, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
I have done a lot of interviews, Andres. This has been right at the top. I really enjoyed this a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.